Welcome to the Rozanne On Demand CFPB video series, featuring Ontario Systems Chief Compliance Officer, Rozanne Anderson. Widely recognized as a leading authority on collection-related compliance, Rozanne leads Ontario Systems' corporate efforts in response to the CFPB's launch of compliance examinations in the arm industry. In this ongoing video series, Rozanne takes a deeper dive into the entire regulation, helping you make sense of the new rule and what it means for your agency. Before we get started, please take a moment to review our legal disclaimer. The information shared today is not legal advice. Please consult with your own independent legal counsel before making any business decisions regarding the use of this information.
Hello, my name is Rozanne Anderson. I'm Vice President and Chief Compliance Officer for Ontario Systems. Welcome to today's video podcast. Today, we will turn our attention to Section 1006.42 of Regulation F. This is the section that addresses how a debt collector must provide a required disclosure to a consumer under the Act. The very basic rule of this section of Regulation F provides that when a debt collector sends any disclosures required by the Act, and you do so in writing or electronically, you must do so in a manner that is reasonably expected to provide actual notice of that disclosure to the consumer and in a form that consumer may keep and access later. So, actual notice in a form the consumer may keep and access later. Now, you need not comply with this section about providing actual notice of a required disclosure if, for example, we're talking about the opt-out notice in an email or a text message, for example. There's no requirement to have e-sign consent to include the words, include your explanation as to how to opt out of an email communication with the consumer or a text message with the consumer. So don't misinterpret this section to extend too broadly to requirements under Regulation F. In other words, the particular requirements of the required disclosures under Regulation F are only those disclosures that must be provided to the consumer in writing, such as the validation notice that is not provided in the initial communication. Rather, it is provided within 5 days of the initial communication, or verification of the debt in response to a dispute submitted to the debt collector in writing during the validation period, or a request for the name and address of the original creditor submitted to the debt collector in writing during the validation period. Those are the 3 instances identified in Regulation F where a debt collector must comply with Section 1006.42 when providing required disclosures to a consumer. Now, with regard to the requirements for sending disclosures, the ones I just mentioned, electronically, a debt collector may substitute the electronic delivery of these required disclosures that you would otherwise have to provide to the consumer in writing, like, for example, using a piece of paper and snail mail, or hand delivered, I suppose. But if you choose to substitute the electronic delivery of those required disclosures, you may do so, but only if you have also complied first with the Electronic Signatures and Global Commerce Act's paragraph C. This is the section of the Electronic Signatures and Global Commerce Act, also known as e-sign, that addresses how consumers must first consent to the delivery of a required disclosure electronically before you or any other party may substitute the electronic delivery of a required disclosure for the snail mail delivery. I'll be the first to say that understanding the Electronic Signatures and Global Commerce Act is confusing. And this is largely because of a misunderstanding of the acronym e-sign. It causes people to immediately believe that this must have something to do with electronic signatures. And while it is true that the Electronic Signatures and Global Commerce Act, passed in 2000, was passed for the purpose of making sure that electronic agreements were as enforceable as paper documents and contracts, and that electronic signatures were as enforceable as, pen and ink type of signature on a piece of paper. That was the purpose of e-sign originally. So it causes people to think about those two aspects of the law. But one really important part of e-sign is this paragraph C, where Congress decided that if a party wishes to substitute the electronic delivery of some sort of a document, they would otherwise have to provide a consumer in writing, under any law for that matter. Right now we're focusing on the FDCP and Regulation F, but the e-sign Act applies whenever you would like to substitute the electronic delivery of a document that would otherwise be required to be provided to the consumer in writing. Well, anyway, what this paragraph C provides for is that you must first, before sending a required disclosure to a consumer, either by email or text, you must first obtain their consent to do so. And that consent is only going to be valid if you first provided them with detailed information about what it means for them to consent to the receipt of required disclosures electronically. For example, you are going to have to provide them with information about the fact that at any time they can basically say uncle and say, please stop providing me with my required disclosures in writing. Please stop doing it electronically. I would prefer that you provide the information to me in paper format. You have to explain that if you are obtaining their consent to provide them required disclosures electronically, you have to find out which medium you are going to use. Is it going to be email or is it going to be a mobile number? You have to explain the software and hardware requirements associated with the use of either one of those mediums for them to receive these required disclosures. So obviously, for example, if they have a phone, they have to be able to receive text messages. If you intend to use URL links and they're going to have to click to open those documents or access a website via their phone, they must have a sufficient, level of smartphone such that they can really receive that information. And why is that important to mention? Because remember, at the outset of this requirement under 1006.42, one of the primary fundamentals of this particular section is that when a debt collector must provide a required disclosure to a consumer in writing, they must do so in a form that constitutes actual notice. Like you have a reason to believe the consumer actually received the information, and it must be provided in a form they may keep and access later. So back to the e-sign consent requirements. They can request a information in writing. They can terminate your permission to substitute the electronic delivery of required disclosures electronically. You need to inform them whether the consent applies to a single account or a number of accounts held by you now or in the future, etc. You have to provide them with the minimum information about the basic software and hardware requirements that they will need in order to receive the information you're going to provide to them electronically, either by email or text. And most importantly, you have to go through a little bit of a dance where they demonstrate their actual ability to receive information from you electronically in a form that they may keep and access later. So, for example, if I were to tell you that I would like to grant you e-sign consent to send me my required disclosures in writing using my email address, I would have to actually first provide you with that email address. And then after listening to all of the disclosures and agreeing to them, I must demonstrate that I actually have the right to access this email, that I can access the email, and that I can open any documents that you may embed in the email or link to the email or otherwise attach as a PDF. So the demonstration step of e-sign consent is incredibly important. Same with the text. If I were to tell you, please send me all my required disclosures, do not do it in writing, just send them to me by text message. Then I need to understand and demonstrate to you that I am capable, using my phone, I'm capable of receiving a text message, and I'm capable by using my phone to open the document, access a URL, etc. So that is a very important piece of understanding e-sign. It is not only that you need to provide the consumer with some basic information about what e-sign consent means, but it is the fact that the consumer actually demonstrates their ability to communicate with you using that particular mode, email, text, and access the information you choose to provide them electronically. That brings us to a conclusion of today's discussion of how to provide required disclosures electronically under Regulation F, Section 1006.42. Thank you.
Thanks again for tuning into this week's episode of the Rozanne On Demand CFPB video series. As always, be sure to visit the Ontario Systems website for more exclusive events and information regarding the 2021 CFPB new rules.